There's a reason why you can't move on, why the past still whispers through your thoughts like a ghost you can't exorcise. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's not just philosophy, that's your reality. The trauma you think you've buried isn't gone. It's alive, operating in the shadows, pulling strings behind every failed relationship, every panic attack, every self-sabotaging decision. You can't heal because you haven't turned around and looked it in the eye. Sigmund Freud called this the return of the repressed. What you refuse to feel doesn't disappear. It mutates. It mutates. It reappears in your body as chronic pain, in your behavior as addiction, in your relationships as conflict. You will never heal until you stop running from the wound and start listening to it. But here's the truth that most people won't tell you. Healing doesn't begin with love or hope or even therapy. It begins with rage, with grief, with terror, with allowing yourself to feel exactly what you felt when the trauma first happened. It begins with the raw, messy, terrifying act of acknowledging that you were hurt, deeply, unjustly, and that you've built your whole life trying to pretend it didn't matter. Jung believed that we meet our destiny in the very path we take to avoid it. And trauma is clever. It hides itself in your strengths, in your perfectionism, in your ambition, in your independence. You think you've survived, but really you've adapted. And adaptation is not healing. Healing begins when you ask, what part of me had to die for me to survive that? It begins when you stop glamorizing your resilience and start grieving your losses. The child who wasn't protected, the adult who never learned safety, the self who learned to smile through betrayal. This is the work Jung called individuation, the lifelong task of becoming whole. Not perfect, whole, which means embracing not just the light but the shadow, not just what happened, but how it shaped you. You will never heal until you stop trying to fix your trauma and start witnessing it, with honesty, with humility, and with the courage to feel what you've been avoiding your entire life. You might not remember everything that happened to you, but your body does. Long after the event is over, long after you've convinced yourself that you've moved on, your body is still there. Tight shoulders, shallow breath, stomach in knots. Sigmund Freud discovered that trauma is often stored not as narrative memory, but as somatic memory. That means it lives in your nervous system, not your words. Carl Jung took it even further. He believed the body is the unconscious. Every time your heart races without warning, every time your throat closes up when someone raises their voice, every time you freeze when you should speak up, your trauma is speaking through your body. This is why logic doesn't work. You can tell yourself it wasn't that bad. You can explain it away with adult reasoning, but your body isn't convinced. Because healing doesn't come from explanation. It comes from integration. Freud called this process working through. It's not about remembering every detail. It's about allowing the emotional residue of the past to finally surface. That means you have to stop gaslighting yourself. Stop minimizing your pain. Trauma isn't about what happened. It's about what you had to do to survive it. Did you go silent? Did you dissociate? Did you become perfect so no one would hurt you again? That's trauma, and it doesn't go away with time. It only waits for the moment when you're still long enough, safe enough, honest enough to finally feel. Jung believed that symptoms are not problems to be solved, but messages to be decoded. Your anxiety isn't random. Your depression isn't laziness. Your panic attacks aren't weakness. They are all messages from the unconscious demanding to be heard. You will never heal until you stop resisting the language of your body and start learning how to listen. That tight chest is your body saying, "I'm not safe." That lump in your throat is your body saying, "I wasn't allowed to speak." That fatigue is your soul saying, "I'm exhausted from carrying this for so long." Healing begins when you stop treating your body like the enemy and start honoring it as the only part of you that never lied. The only part that always told the truth, even when your mind tried to forget. Most people think they've healed just because they don't think about the trauma anymore. But forgetting is not the same as healing, it's repression. And repression, as Freud taught us, is a defense mechanism, not a cure. It's your mind's way of protecting you from what it believes you can't handle. It buries the unbearable deep in the unconscious and slams the door shut. But the trauma doesn't die down there. It festers. It grows. It twists itself into your behaviors, your relationships, your fears. You find yourself snapping at people you love, avoiding places you used to enjoy, crying at things you can't explain. And still you think, why do I feel like this? Because repression doesn't erase. It delays. It stalls the healing until you're strong enough to face what's underneath. Carl Jung warned that what you repress will eventually manifest as fate. You'll think the world is out to get you when it's actually your shadow screaming for attention. You'll keep attracting the same toxic relationships, not because you're cursed, but because your unconscious is recreating the original wound, hoping this time you'll make a different choice. And you can't make that choice until you bring the pain into the light. Jung called this bringing the unconscious into consciousness. It's the cornerstone of individuation, the process of becoming whole. And wholeness doesn't come from pretending the dark never existed. It comes from facing it, naming it, and making peace with it. Freud observed that unprocessed trauma often returns in disguise, through what he called the return of the repressed. Nightmares, intrusive thoughts, compulsions. These are all signs that your unconscious is trying to bring you back to the wound, not to punish you, but to finally set you free. But freedom requires courage. Courage to feel what you couldn't feel before, to admit what you swore you'd never say out loud, to grieve the parts of yourself you had to abandon just to survive. Healing is not erasing the past. It's reclaiming the parts of you that got lost in it. You will never heal until you stop confusing numbness with peace. Real peace comes not from forgetting, but from remembering in a way that no longer controls you. You can tell yourself you're fine. You can convince your mind to move on. But your body never lies. The trauma you repress doesn't just vanish. It lodges itself in your nervous system. It tightens your shoulders, shortens your breath, clenches your stomach. It shows up in the panic attacks you can't explain, the insomnia that won't leave, the exhaustion that sleep never fixes. Freud understood that unprocessed emotions don't just disappear, they find another way out. And often, that way is through the body. Jung expanded on this by recognizing that the body is the vessel of the unconscious, and that the psyche and soma are deeply intertwined. When you experience trauma, especially in early life, the overwhelming emotion can't be integrated, so it becomes frozen in your cells. You don't just remember with your mind, you remember with your body. That's why a smell, sound, a glance can suddenly send you spiraling. You think it's irrational, but it's not. It's your body reliving something it never got to resolve. And until you learn to listen to it, you'll be at its mercy. The shaking, the tightness, the shutting down. These aren't symptoms to suppress. They're messages, warnings, invitations to go deeper. Healing requires more than talk. It requires embodiment. You must come back into your body, into the place you learned to escape. Trauma teaches you to dissociate, to flee your own flesh. Healing asks you to return, to feel, to breathe, to move through the pain rather than run from it. Practices like somatic experiencing, breathwork, yoga, and even mindful walking aren't just trendy, they're necessary tools to reconnect with what was split. Because when you were traumatized, you were cut off, not just from the world, but from yourself. You left your body because it wasn't safe to stay. But you will never heal until you reclaim that space. The body must feel safe again. That's the first step. Not talking, not understanding, but safety. You can't think your way out of trauma. You must feel your way through it, slowly, gently, at your own pace. But you must return, because until your body feels what your mind denies, the trauma will live on. There's a part of you you've been taught to hide. The angry part, the fearful part, the broken, ashamed, reactive part. You were told to silence it, control it, deny it. But here's the truth Carl Jung insisted we face. What you repress doesn't disappear. It becomes the shadow, and it rules your life from the dark. The shadow is everything you don't want to be, everything you reject about yourself. But it's not just evil or destructive. It's wounded, it's terrified, and most importantly, it's trying to protect you. When you experienced trauma, your psyche couldn't cope with the overwhelming pain, so it exiled parts of your experience into the unconscious. Those parts, the vulnerable child, the furious teenager, the helpless victim, became unacceptable. You disowned them. But they didn't go away. They went underground. And now they show up in your triggers, your self-sabotage, your relationships. You overreact and don't know why. You freeze up in conflict. You push people away before they can hurt you. That's not weakness. That's the shadow trying to keep you safe the only way it knows how. Jung taught that healing requires confronting this shadow, not as an enemy, but as a lost part of yourself. You can't heal by being good. You heal by being whole. That means turning inward and asking, what part of me am I afraid to face? What emotion have I locked away? What truth have I refused to admit? Most people run from these questions, but you must walk toward them, because the shadow, though terrifying, holds the key to your power. It holds your anger, yes, but also your boundaries. It holds your fear, but also your courage. It holds your pain, but also your deepest potential. Freud showed that repression causes neurosis. Jung took it further. What is repressed must be integrated, not fixed, not destroyed, integrated. And that means compassion, to see the shadow without judgment, to hold space for the part of you that broke, to welcome the exiled self back into the light. That is how you heal, not by rejecting who you were, but by becoming all of who you are. Why do you keep ending up in the same kind of pain? Why do your relationships follow the same destructive pattern? Why do you sabotage your own happiness just when things start to go well? Freud had a chilling answer: repetition compulsion. It's not a flaw in your character, it's a law of the unconscious. When trauma is unhealed, the mind compulsively recreates the original wound, again and again, as if trying to master it, fix it, or make it come out differently this time. But it never does. You find yourself drawn to people who feel strangely familiar, who activate old fears and longings. You mistake it for love, but it's the past resurfacing. A child who wasn't heard will unconsciously choose partners who won't listen. A person abandoned will be drawn to those who can't commit. You're not choosing these patterns consciously. Something deeper is at work, a hidden script written in the language of pain that keeps playing out until you rewrite it. Freud saw this as the unconscious trying to resolve what it couldn't process. You return to the scene of the crime, hoping for a different ending. But trauma doesn't resolve through repetition, it deepens. Every cycle leaves you more confused, more broken, more convinced something is wrong with you. But Jung offered a path forward. He believed the answer wasn't to escape the repetition, but to become conscious of it, to bring light to what's been unconscious. That's how you break the cycle. Start noticing your triggers, your attractions, your conflicts, not as random events, but as messages from your psyche. Ask, what does this pattern remind me of? Who does this person feel like? What wound is being reopened here? Once you begin to see the repetition, you have a choice. You no longer have to react, you can respond. You can set boundaries where you once collapsed. You can walk away where you once clung. You can speak the truth where you once stayed silent. Repetition compulsion is powerful, but consciousness is more powerful. Every time you make a different choice, you disrupt the old script. Every time you notice instead of numb, feel instead of flee, you reclaim your freedom. That is how healing begins, not in fixing the past, but in refusing to let it write your future. Healing trauma means more than avoiding pain. It demands that you confront your shadow, the hidden parts of yourself that trauma buried deep. Carl Jung taught us that within every person lies a shadow side made of fears, wounds, anger, shame, and unacknowledged desires. Trauma often pushes these parts even deeper, burying them so far we barely recognize they exist. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits, grows, and influences our lives in ways we don't understand. It may appear as irritability, self-sabotage, addictions, or destructive behaviors. It whispers lies like, "I'm unworthy," "I'm broken," or "I don't deserve love." When ignored, the shadow controls you from the inside, shaping your choices and relationships without your conscious consent. Jung insisted that true healing requires shadow work, a courageous process of turning inward, shining light on those dark corners of your psyche. This means embracing the uncomfortable truths about yourself, admitting where you've been hurt, and owning the parts you've rejected or feared. Shadow work isn't about blame or guilt. It's about awareness and integration. It's understanding that the parts you've hidden are often trying to protect you, shield you from more pain, or express a need left unmet. Freud's psychoanalysis focused on bringing unconscious conflicts to the surface. Jung took it further by encouraging us to reconcile with those conflicts, to make friends with our shadow. This process is neither quick nor easy. It requires patience, self-compassion, and sometimes guidance. But it is essential because healing trauma is not just about overcoming external wounds. It's about reclaiming your whole self. When you face your shadow, you dismantle the power trauma holds over you. The anger that once erupted uncontrollably can become a signal of your boundaries. The shame that kept you silent can transform into a source of empathy and strength. The fears that imprisoned you can be acknowledged and gradually released. By integrating the shadow, you become more whole, more authentic, more free. You stop running from yourself and start living as the person you were always meant to be. This is the alchemy of healing, turning pain into power, brokenness into wholeness, darkness into light. One of the most frustrating aspects of trauma is how it traps us in repetitive cycles of pain. Freud called this phenomenon repetition compulsion, where individuals unconsciously reenact traumatic patterns in relationships, behaviors, or emotional responses, even when these patterns cause harm. It's as if the psyche is stuck in a loop, trying desperately to master the original trauma but instead getting caught in endless reruns. You might find yourself drawn to toxic relationships, recreating situations where you feel powerless or abandoned. You might self-sabotage your progress or emotionally withdraw just as things start to improve. This is the unconscious mind's way of trying to understand or resolve what was never fully processed. Jung saw repetition compulsion through a different lens. It's the unconscious calling for integration. When trauma is unacknowledged or repressed, the mind attempts to bring it into consciousness by recreating similar emotional situations. This forces you to confront what you've avoided, though often in painful ways. Breaking free from repetition compulsion requires awareness. First, you must recognize the patterns and see their connection to past trauma. This means paying attention to the triggers that activate old wounds and noticing how you react. Then comes the work of choice, choosing not to react from old conditioning, but to respond consciously. This is where healing truly begins. Therapy can be an invaluable tool here, offering a safe space to explore these cycles, understand their roots, and develop healthier ways to cope. Jung's concept of individuation, the journey towards self-realization, involves transforming these unconscious patterns into conscious knowledge. By doing this, you reclaim your power, refusing to be controlled by past wounds. You learn new ways of relating to yourself and others, based on authenticity rather than fear. This isn't about perfection or never making mistakes. It's about breaking the chains of unconscious repetition and moving toward freedom. Trauma doesn't have to define your future. With courage and awareness, you can rewrite your story and build a life where you're no longer trapped by the past but empowered by the lessons it taught. Integration, the path to wholeness and healing. Healing from trauma is not about erasing the past or pretending the pain never existed. It's about integrating those experiences into the fabric of your being, so they no longer hold unconscious power over you. Carl Jung emphasized the importance of integration, the process of bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness, as the essential step towards psychological wholeness. When you integrate trauma, you allow yourself to face the difficult emotions, memories, and shadows you once avoided. This requires honesty and bravery because it means sitting with discomfort without fleeing or numbing yourself. Freud also stressed the importance of making the unconscious conscious to resolve inner conflicts. He believed that unresolved trauma festers beneath the surface, influencing behaviors and emotions in ways we don't fully understand. Through therapy, self-reflection, or creative expression, you begin to illuminate these dark corners of your psyche. Integration doesn't mean you become defined by your trauma. Rather, you learn to accept it as part of your story, a chapter that shaped you, but does not dictate your entire narrative. You develop new perspectives and emotional resilience. This process often involves reconnecting with parts of yourself you may have disowned: anger, sadness, vulnerability, or even strength. Jung called this embracing the shadow, the hidden aspects of our personality that we often reject but are vital for balance. By acknowledging your shadow, you reclaim parts of your identity and gain deeper self-understanding. Healing is not linear, and integration is ongoing. Some days may feel like progress, others like setbacks. But each time you choose awareness over avoidance, you move closer to wholeness. You learn to hold your pain with compassion and kindness instead of judgment or shame. Ultimately, integration transforms trauma from a source of suffering into a catalyst for growth. It awakens your capacity for empathy, creativity, and connection, qualities that enrich your life and relationships. This chapter of your healing journey is about reclaiming your power and embracing your full humanity. When you integrate trauma, you open the door to genuine freedom. Transformation, embracing new life beyond trauma. The final step in healing from trauma, as both Carl Jung and Freud suggest, is transformation. This transformation is not merely a return to your former self, but a profound rebirth into a more conscious, resilient, and authentic version of who you are. Trauma leaves an indelible mark, but it doesn't have to define your future. When you do the deep, difficult work of facing, processing, and integrating your pain, you begin to shed old patterns of avoidance, fear, and self-limitation. Freud described this as the cathartic release, where unconscious conflicts lose their grip as they enter conscious awareness, allowing healing to unfold. Jung called it individuation, the journey toward becoming your true self by reconciling all aspects of your psyche, the conscious and unconscious, the light and shadow. Transformation requires commitment and patience. It means developing new coping strategies, setting healthy boundaries, and cultivating self-compassion. It also involves rewriting your internal narrative, shifting from a victim mindset to one of survivor and thriver. You start seeing your trauma, not as a curse but as a profound teacher that offered lessons about strength, vulnerability, and resilience. This new perspective empowers you to live with greater authenticity and presence. Importantly, transformation opens you up to connection, not just with others but with yourself on a deeper level. You become more attuned to your emotions, needs, and desires. You find meaning in your suffering and can use it to help others, turning pain into purpose. Healing trauma is an ongoing process, and transformation does not mean perfection, but progress. It is a continuous unfolding of growth, awareness, and healing. By embracing this process, you reclaim your life from the past and step into a future filled with hope, possibility, and renewed wholeness. Remember, you will never heal until you do this with your trauma. Face it, understand it, integrate it, and transform, because only then can you truly be free.